Hello, so I'm Graham, I'm a truck driver, so I'm going to talk about the truck driver shortage. And it's particularly acute in Britain and a big topic of conversation because people are queuing up at petrol stations because supposedly we're running out of petrol. There's a few empty shelves on in the supermarkets. And my job is in high demand, apparently. And what's going on here? Well, a lot of people are talking about Brexit. Lots of Eastern European drivers are no longer working in the UK. They went home during COVID, and because a change in the tax laws, which basically meant people couldn't evade tax by working for an agency in a certain way. That's the truth of that. And they decided they didn't want to carry on working in England, and they've gone back to Poland or Romania, or maybe they're working in Germany. I don't know, but they're not here. Okay, there's a certain amount of truth to that, but there's also truck driver shortages across the European Union as well, and there's studies that tell us this. Also, when I speak to foreign drivers, I spoke to an Austrian driver the other day. He told me that he could name his salary because there's a big shortage of truck drivers in Austria and in Germany. So it's a deeper problem. Obviously, Austria is still in the European Union, and not only is it still in the European Union, it's bordered by 4 former Eastern European countries where a lot of these migrant workers were coming from. And there's problems in Canada and United States. I'm not sure about down under and other places, but certainly across most of the rich world, there's a shortage of truck drivers. I think I might know why that is, or have some idea. There's 1999, our Prime Minister Tony Blair decided that 50% of young school leavers, should go to university. Okay, didn't quite achieve that. I think that the figure's something like 40%. I'm not quite sure. It's a lot. It's a lot more than it used to be. It used to be that only a fraction of people went to university from school in the UK. Well, okay, so they set that up and they expanded the universities. They brought in new loan schemes, although they did raise tuition fees greatly. The schools were incentivized to send as many kids as they could to university. And what happened next was pure supply and demand. We trained lots of people up. We sent lots of people to university. Supposedly so they could come out to do university level jobs. And that meant less people were trained to be plumbers and electricians and truck drivers and farm workers. And basically all of those occupations that we have a shortage of now. And what happened in the UK, at least, is we filled those vacancies with foreign workers. So you had the situations where, there's some trucking companies, 80% of the drivers were Eastern European, on some shifts at least. And in every company there was a large representation of mostly Eastern European drivers. But that's always, even without Brexit, that's a risk. Of course that's going to be a risk because they might go home. And many people have stayed. Even after Brexit, many Eastern Europeans have stayed. I have many good friends who are still from Eastern Europe who are still in this country driving lorries, and they've established themselves here. And fair play to them. But for whatever reason, if you import labour, that labour might then export itself. This fairly obvious reason, very obvious thing, isn't it? They walk in, they can walk out. So it's always going to be a risk. And failing to train people to do those jobs is always going to be a risk as well. But that's what we've done. And it's what other countries have done as well. So many countries are having problems with the same issue. I think the United States is probably the second worst after the UK. As having quite severe problems getting truck drivers. And so it's puzzling why all those years ago a Labour government would seemingly want to create a middle class, a bigger middle class. Well, I think I know the reason why that is as well. It's because the European model, or the business plan of the European Union, is basically a globalization model, which is, in other words, a way of saying it's a cheap labour model. Okay, globalization as an idea is cheap labour as an idea. You get this factory from this place and put it in this place, and it's in this, you put it in this place simply because the wages are lower. There's no new ideas, there's no new thought, there's no new technology, there's no new techniques. You're simply taking this and put it there, and it could be a factory or a trucking company. And then to further drive down wages, you can move people around. So what you could do is you can then take people from middle income countries and put them in wealthy countries to work as service workers, as waiting staff, or factory workers, or farm workers, or truck drivers. And this is what happened in the European Union, particularly, and it's particularly what happened in Britain. In large part because the same Labour government decided that they would not place so many restrictions as other European Union countries did on Eastern European or EU workers coming here. And I keep saying Eastern European because by and large they were from Eastern Europe, because Eastern Europe was coming out of communism, transforming their countries into free market countries, but wages were still low as they came out of that place. Okay, so what's the problem with that? Fine, it increases GDP and makes the economy bigger. That's fine. Yes. The only problem with that is it's destined to succeed itself out of business. If you're going to grow the economy by creating or going to sources of cheap labour, you increase the GDP of the places where that labour is or where it comes from. So it stops being cheap labour. So these globalisation stroke cheap labour projects have to succeed themselves out of business. And whilst the globalists make great claims that it reduces poverty, in actual fact that's not their goal. When it reduces poverty, that's bad for them. It actually takes away the unique selling point of what they were doing. This factory over here, or this trucking company over here, the wages have gone up. So now what to do? You have to do something else. Well, at the moment, there's nothing else to do. No one's got another idea. No one's got a new piece of technology that's going to change this. It's stalled. I think it's the best way of describing it. Not going out of business, but stalling. It just stops. And we go back to why on earth did why did the Labour government want to put people into the stroke middle class? Well, have they gone into the middle class? I would suggest that this is part of the Globalization Project as well. So in the European Union microcosm Globalization Project, so you create your cheapest possible working class factory workers in places like China and perhaps Turkey and other parts of the cheaper parts of the European Union, cheaper labour parts of the European Union, and you create your cheap service class, by moving people away from poorer countries, perhaps like from the Philippines, all over the world. Or from Eastern Europe to Western Europe, and the European Union made that much easier, of course. But then you're going to need, as cheap as possible, clerical class. You're going to need pen pushers. Like, you think of the entire world as becoming one big sweatshop factory. Okay, so you've defined your workers, you've defined your cleaners, and now you can define your typing pool. So, these are the guys who are doing the donkey work in offices, and so what you need, that's not going to come from the cheap labour parts. It's not going to come from the middle income parts. It's going to come from the quote rich parts. But you still want to drive those wages down by creating lots of them. And I believe that that's what's happened, that the world has indeed become one big sweatshop factory with um, with these defined roles coming from different parts of the world, and it is succeeding itself out of business. It is stalling now. That's what we've been looking at. I think it's about what we've been looking at for the last 10 years at least. And where to go from? People make this claim, well, you know, it increases GDP, it makes us all richer. There's this phrase, a rising tide floats all boats. Right, this is a con, okay? It's, if you are in one of those three groups, the cheap labour, the cheap working class, the cheap service class, and the cheap clerical class, you are not the boats, you are the water. You are the thing doing the rising. You are the thing that's lifting other people up. And it's quite obvious who the other people are. It's the elite globalists. It's a group of people who are wealthy beyond the means of avarice. I mean, you find a group of the richest people in the world and you can find kings and sultans and the current tech billionaires. And of course, that's just the people we know about. I'm sure lots of these people are hiding a lot of their wealth, certainly in communist China. And so we don't really know who these people are. But it is true that we've seen a massive rise in wealth inequality over the last few years or so, and especially since the start of COVID, where lockdowns just supercharged this. Let's go back to the clerical class. In this system, you also need consumers, and it's explicitly stated the consumers come from basically Western Europe and North America. Okay, but there's a dichotomy there, because you're forcing those wages down, and you're trying to make those people as cheap as possible. You're trying to fool them into thinking they're wealthy. So what's been happening is the amount of debt's been going up, the amount of debt that individuals has taken, the amount of debt that governments have taken on, and business has taken on, and this creates a whole, in their theory, it creates a whole circular loop, a virtuous circle where the system keeps feeding itself. Or another way of looking at it, just accelerates to the point where it's going to stall. So what? Where do we go from here? Well, one of the things that's stopping us, we don't recognise this, because lots of these people who are in this cheap clerical class, part of the trick is to fool them, or maybe us, into feeling that they are part of the elites. So the elites are graduates, the clerical class are graduates. The elites dress well. The clerical class dress well. They don't do dirty work. Okay, and I think there's been a bit of a there has been a confidence trick, where lots of people in the West truly believe they are parts of the elites. They're not. They're really, really not. Okay. And what happens is you get someone like Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum, or Christine Lagarde. Oh, by the way, let's not forget that whilst we have this money elite, which is also a power elite, then we got another power elite, where various institutions are formed to enact globalism. The International Monetary Forum, the World Economic Forum, the Davos set. So that's one of the best descriptions of these people. But there's lots of people who believe that they're part of the same set. And when Christine Lagarde stands up and says, we are going to do X. We're going to do something with vaccinations, or we're going to do something about COVID, or we're going to do something about world trade, or what have you. There's lots of people say, yes, we are going to do. Me and Christine Lagarde, and we're she's a graduate, I'm a graduate. I'm smart, she's smart. I understand economics, she understands economics. We're going to do this. We're going to make this new world order, this better world. No, you're not. You're not. When she says we, she doesn't mean you. Okay, you're not part of that. Okay, what about her personally? But they have 5 homes and money tucked away in a tax haven bank account. You have £60,000 of student debt, and you can't afford to put a deposit on a home. You're not part of the elite. You just feel you are. I think there's a lot of people in that situation. But this, I think, again, this is jumping a long way from truck driver shortage. But if you stop and think about it, you can see how they're all connected. Because obviously this plan it's not well thought through. It's not an idea to increase at base. It's not an idea to increase the well-being of normal human beings. It's an idea to make a small group of people immensely rich and powerful. Okay. And they become a god in a pantheon of their own belief. And this is what's been happening. And I think what's happening now is it's starting to unravel. There was always going to, in all of these places, there was always going to be a group of people who fall through this, who don't get degrees in the rich world, or who elevate themselves to being part of a clerical elite in places like China, or see themselves that way. It's never a clearly thought through thing, and I think it was quite clear it was going to fail, but stall. But these people didn't care because they were just making an immense amount of money. So where do we go? I think we're just, I don't know, and it's not going to get any better. It's been 22 years since Tony Blair basically said, well, we're going to create a clerical working class, and so those babies in 1999 are just leaving university, unable to be truck drivers, the Romanians, all the Romanians and Bulgarians who are going to become truck drivers have become truck drivers. One of the biggest staff shortages in the haulage industry and the road transport industry is in Poland, kind of the original cheap labour part of the European Union, which kind of shows how it's stalling in this continent, at least. I think we've got to recognise that we're being played. I think we've got to understand this rebalancing. I think we've got to maybe swallow pride and say, look, I should need to retrain and do a job that doesn't require a tertiary education. And let's be frank, a lot of the jobs that these people end up in do not require a tertiary education, and people actually quite hate their jobs. David Graeber's book, Bullshit Jobs, outlines this very well. The number of people who are doing white-collar jobs in the Western world who hate their jobs, absolutely despise them, and they don't get paid much for it. Of course, that's the point of the globalization, isn't it? It's a cheap labour project. Yeah, and this is another thing. Is I think we as people need to change this, because it's not very nice. People don't like this. We are turned into merely workers and consumers. Any other part of us is ignored. The spiritual side of us, the national side of us, the community side of us is ignored. When a Romanian lorry driver goes from Romania to the United Kingdom to work, then it disrupts both places. And whilst a little bit of migration is probably a good thing, it's like adding a little bit of seasoning into the mix in the country you're in, a little bit, globalization isn't about making cultures better. It's about making money, and they don't care if they get the pot and pour a whole bunch of chili into it, or sugar, or some kind of the wrong ingredient. They don't really care if it mixes, they care if it makes money. And this is what's been happening, and of course people have pushed back against this. I think we basically need to understand this world, and we need to understand it's going to change. If it's not stalling right now, it will stall. It's stalling in the European Union, it's going to stall in the rest of the world, and we need leaders and people who both understand this and are going to go, have to find something new. We had to find a new piece of technology or a new philosophy or some kind of new belief, a new sense of meaning. Okay, but globalism is stalling and will carry on stalling. It's not a source of well-being. It's a way of some people making a lot of money. Anyway, I've said enough. That's a big leap out from why there's a truck driver shortage in the UK. But all of these things are always symptoms of something much, much, much bigger. And that's what I believe is happening. Bye.